Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. Six Flags Over Texas is a park I recently went back to. I had gone in summer 2022, but I just went back in early April, and I've always felt that this park had a pretty underrated coaster lineup. My most recent visit only confirmed this even further. I think this might be the most underrated coaster lineup in the country. All 12 major roller coasters are very fun, and there's something for pretty much everyone. So many great manufacturers are covered here, there's unique rides, a great variety, family coasters, thrilling coasters, you name it. This is a super well-rounded lineup, and frankly, in my opinion, one of the best roller coaster lineups in the United States. So that's what we're going to talk about here. I'm ranking the 12 major roller coasters, so not Mini Mine Train or whatever the Looney Tunes coaster is. And while there are some low-ranking rides naturally, you're going to have a last place in any ranking, the main goal of this is to talk about what makes the rides great and how they contribute to the overall phenomenal roller coaster lineup of this park. Now, the one other caveat is that these will be some unconventional orderings, because they are not based on conventional rankings, they're based on my own. My experiences are definitely different from anyone else's. I like some rides more than others and dislike some to an extent that others might really enjoy. Most of these rides I think are very underrated, some might be a tad overrated, and we will get to that. I will do my best to justify every individual point, and with all that out of the way, let's begin with number 12. Number 12 is La Vibora. This is a bobsled roller coaster, a very unique model. I only know of one other in the States, and there aren't that many out there in the world, period. So there is some fun to be had with that. However, compared to Reptilian and King's Dominion, I do find the transitions between the fun sledding parts and the stabilizing sections to be much jankier. When you're in that really large tube, going side to side, going up the walls, it's so much fun, very unique, moderately thrilling, a great family coaster. Those transitions will definitely bang up your leg a bit though, unless you're a kid riding it. And that is why this is a good one for young thrill seekers trying to find out what rides they enjoy. And I think it would work for most people in that demographic. For me, it does hurt a little more than the other rides in the park, but still, very fun experience. Definitely recommend getting at least one ride on this one. Number 11, Pandemonium. This Gerstlauer spinning coaster does have some weird trains, because they have Twix advertisements on them. So of course many joke it should be called Candymonium, but the ride itself is quite fun. If you're lucky and get a pretty unbalanced ride, it does take a little bit of effort to try to get the weight not very balanced in your car, you can get a lot of spinning. I think it's most fun when you're still spinning on the final brake run. Some may not enjoy that, but I aim to get that every single time. The ride itself, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a few sections that are just not as spinny, but when you're spinning around a lot, it can be super disorienting and intense, and it's a very fun type of family thrill. It's definitely no time travel or Silver Dollar City, and there are other better family spinning coasters like Cobra's Curse at Busch Gardens Tampa, but this one is certainly a good one to introduce kids to, and while I don't think it's super distinguishable from the other Pandemoniums and other Six Flags parks, it is certainly a worthwhile ride. Number 10, Judge Roy's Scream. It is a classic wooden coaster. Out and back layout, not much else to it in terms of the layout itself, it's just hills, and that is fine. Other rides here do have more unique layouts to them, but it doesn't need to be anything more for what it is. I think generally it lacks forces overall. You don't get thrown out of your seat with airtime except for the second to last hill, which was very surprising to me actually. I thought the last one was super good. I was surprised how good that part was, but the rest of it is just decent fun. It is not nearly as rough as some other wooden coasters in Six Flags parks, and I was very happy about that because while I generally have a good tolerance for that sort of roughness, some of those rides are very hard to enjoy. This one is a good, simple wooden coaster that is a bit of a one and done because it's not the kind of thing you would want to wait a super long time for, but nonetheless, it is definitely enjoyable and having that older wooden coaster is a very nice way to fill that wooden coaster gap at Six Flags Over Texas. It doesn't need a super grand GCI or Gravity group, because other rides in the park do sort of fill similar gaps, and we'll get to that later on in the list. Number 9 is Aquaman Power Wave, the newest of the roller coasters. This Mock Rides Power Splash roller coaster has a simple but very effective concept. You go backwards, up a spike, then you go forwards, up another spike, then you launch backwards, up that same spike you started with, and as you go down again, you get soaked. That is, if you're sitting on the outside seats. I had a family member sitting on an inside seat, and I was on the outside, and I was very cold and wet for the next hour or so. That said, it is quite the fun experience. I think the sensation of looking down a spike and being sustained in the air for a little bit is always very fun, especially with such a steep angle like this ride. And the splash itself is a genuinely scary moment, because as you're going up the spike the second time, it hits you, oh wait, you're about to get soaked. And I love that. This ride is definitely not one with the most wild elements or the craziest forces, but there is some surprising power in the launches, especially given how much people make fun of Mock Ride's launches. And as a result, I think the ride is a bit better than I expected, and definitely a very good accessible ride for those who don't mind getting wet to have in the park. Number 8 is the Joker. The Joker is an SNS 40 free spin, a highly controversial model amongst coaster enthusiasts in terms of whether it is really fun or unbearable. I have always enjoyed this ride model, and I got 2 rides on it on my most recent visit, and they were both among the very best free spin rides I've gotten. Normally you get 2, maybe 3 full flips on a ride, but I was getting 4 or 5 on some of these, constantly going upside down again and again, and spinning on that axis is always a very fun experience. I mean, people absolutely worship X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain, so why should this be any different? Certainly, the layout is simple and compact like with Aquaman, but it is nonetheless incredibly thrilling, and it doesn't feel as short as it looks. The same goes for Aquaman, but this one gets an edge for being even more thrilling, and I generally look for those intense rides, and I think many thrill seekers will find there's quite a lot to enjoy here, if you enjoy the model, that is. Number 7, Runaway Mine Train, a historic roller coaster as the first mine train by Aerodynamics. These mine train rides are pretty much everywhere. They have a classic feel to them, maybe sometimes bumpy, and they can be very scenic. And I would say this is among the most scenic. You go along so many areas of the park, you get great views of the roller coaster such as Mr. Freeze, and beyond that, there's some very nice terrain. It's mainly just the shrubs and a few small lakes you get. It is a very flat area, but nonetheless, it's very nice to be weaving your way around that at a bit of a low speed. The ride is not really anything wild in terms of thrills like Joker, until the end. Once you go up the 3rd lift hill, you enter a model saloon, which is simple but very well themed and fun, and then you go through a shockingly good drop. This drop is one of the most terrifying in the whole park, and I think it's possibly one of the best moments on any roller coaster at Six Flags Over Texas. It is a short but thrilling moment where you get thrown out of your seat for a bit, and your eyes might be thrown out of their sockets. That's a figure of speech, by the way, that's never actually happened. But in the end, you turn around, that's the ride. It is a very long, sometimes meandering roller coaster, but it's perfect for both kids and major thrill seekers, and it's never dull, but always a classic. Number 6 is Shockwave. Shockwave is a Schwarzkopf looping coaster, another very old classic ride, and it has a low height requirement as many of those rides do, and I'm not quite sure it warrants it because the airtime is truly insane on this ride. You, on some drops, get absolutely flung into the lap bar, and I think it's painful. Sometimes, I think of the 3 major airtime moments, 2 of them hurt quite a bit, but there is some fun to that. I think if they didn't hurt, it'd be more fun if they had that same shock to them, but nonetheless, it's some great moments. Additionally, you open the ride with 2 excellent loops. That double loop is always a very fun thing to have on a roller coaster, and I think the Schwarzkopf loopers in general are very fun, but this is the best of them. The only one that might compete is Montezuma's Revenge for me, and that one's kind of hard to compare because it's a launch coaster. So for those full circuit loopers, this is my favorite one by a pretty big margin. It has shockingly thrilling elements for a ride with such a low height requirement, but also has some very good conventional ones. And the mix of those makes for a super fun ride, and it's the sort of thing that people who really love rides such as Magnum would probably put near the very top of the list. It's a bit lower for me, but the fact that there are 5 coasters even better than this one just goes to show how strong the top of this lineup's about to get. Number 5, Runaway Mountain. So I've been talking about a few rides here that I find underrated to an extent. I think Joker is a bit underrated, Runaway Mine Train is definitely underrated, Runaway Mountain is the most underrated of the roller coasters we've talked about so far. It is a Premier Rides roller coaster, but it is not launched like many of their rides are. It's fully indoors, and when the room is dark enough, this is a wild experience. A lot of people praise Space Mountain as a dark indoor roller coaster where you have no idea what's coming next, but Space Mountain has nothing like the twisting drop on this ride. I won't describe it too much so you can be a bit surprised for yourself, but when it happens on a dark ride, this is one of the best drops, even better than the Runaway Mine Train drop I mentioned, in the whole park. It is a shocking moment, really takes the wind out of you for a moment, in the best possible way. The ride is smooth, it's decently long, very well paced, so many fun individual elements. It's not very airtime heavy, and I do love airtime, so that does hinder maybe a little bit, but it's a very cohesive indoor roller coaster that families can enjoy because of the spooky indoor feel and the fun little theming on the outside, and thrill seekers will appreciate elements like that twisting drop. Number 4, Batman the Ride. This is one of many inverted roller coasters by Bolliger and Mabiard, and it is the same layout you can find at many other Six Flags parks. This is without a doubt my least favorite of the model, because it tends to give rougher rides. You almost always will get some headbanging on here, and the foot numbness is some of the strongest. For those who don't know, the foot numbness happens because on an inverted coaster, your feet are dangling below the track, and the G-forces being put against them can lead to some somewhat uncomfortable sensations. However, this is not a huge setback, and this layout is still excellent. The ride looks really nice with some good paint job and some fun little theming around it, but this is a small, compact B&M invert, meaning the transitions between elements are super whippy. You fly through some of these upside down moments, and that means you're getting some incredible G-forces pulled. You're not focused on hang time like some other inversions where you're dangling for a long period and it's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna fall out of your seat. Instead, you're tearing through it, crazy G-forces, and that can be just as fun. I think some of the best B&M inverts focus on that sort of thing. Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa is a world-class roller coaster in my eyes, and it has those whippy transitions. This ride is almost as intense as that one. It is smaller and not quite as smooth and enjoyable, but it is still a blast of a ride, and I love B&M's roller coasters. They're some of my favorites in the world, so I'm glad that the manufacturer has something at this great park. Number 3 is Titan. Titan is a Gaio Vinola hypercoaster, one of only 2 in existence, and by far the better one. Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain is the inferior due to a general lack of great moments. There is one intense helix, and that is it. This one has much more than that helix. It does have that too, because that is probably the star moment of the ride. The sustained forces of that helix are the closest I've come to graying out on a roller coaster since Intimidator 305, which is the only roller coaster to ever make me gray out. For those who don't know, graying out is a hard to explain phenomenon, but when strong G-forces are applied, your vision does literally start to go gray and blurry, which is somewhat scary for some. Many do not enjoy it, but that's the kind of thing I live for with roller coasters. That intensity is unbelievable, and it carries over to the second half of the ride, full of intense turns that have the sustained forces that make this ride so memorable. On top of that, the first drop builds up great speed, and there was one very good airtime moments. Very good, not compared to some other rides on this list, but still solid. So overall, this is an excellent ride. It's only held back by a mid-course brake run that really does kill the pacing. That said, with how intense the second half of the ride after it is clear that it's needed. I just think maybe they could have made it a bit more gradual. That way, you don't completely lose all of the speed you have. But all in all, this ride has so many great moments and a general intensity that I don't mind it that much, and it is definitely a great hypercoaster, maybe better than some of the B&M hypers. Number 2 is Mr. Freeze. I miss when it was Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast, but fortunately, the reverse can still be experienced. On one of the days I went to the park, one track was open only and it was the forward one, which was kinda disappointing, because forward is worse in my opinion. The backward launch feels more intense, and staring down the spike instead of looking up it is way cooler. Pun not intended, my bad. But the ride itself, no matter which direction, has a lot of merit. The launch itself is not the most powerful, as many Premier Rides launches are not, but the elements are perfect. The inverted top hat is a super intense, compact inversion. The overbank turn really builds up great speed, and then going up the spike, it gives you a moment to breathe before going back through it again. It's a small, simple layout, like Joker or Aquaman Power Wave is, but it's so effective, and this is the best Premier Rides roller coaster. I find it a bit smoother and more enjoyable than the Six Flags St. Louis one, that is also Mr. Freeze, but I think that one might still be called Reverse Blast. But against so many other major Premier Rides coasters, things like Full Throttle, West Coast Racers, the Skyrocket 2 model, I think this is the best one. It's sorta short, but man is it sweet. You get crazy forces, even the launch itself that isn't that powerful feels grand because of the great backwards momentum you have going, and the different elements all stand out. And that's something that's really good in a roller coaster. When you have distinct moments you remember, it can be a very fun experience, and this is definitely one of the most fun experiences at the park, and at many other parks in this country, it could be the number 1 roller coaster. But it's not even close here. Number 1 is New Texas Giants. New Texas Giants is perhaps the most underrated roller coaster, period. Probably not, actually. There are a few I might put above, including Runaway Mountain, but it's way up there. This is a Rocky Mountain construction hybrid roller coaster, and it definitely does have things that can be said in terms of criticisms. Disregarding some previous issues that have happened with the ride, it currently does generally lack the intense pacing of other RMCs. RMC roller coasters have gotten very, very fast lately. They tear through elements like Batman the Ride, but even more so, and with better elements overall. But this is still a really good RMC in my opinion. The first drop feels massive. It is massive, but it's frankly an upper tier RMC first drop. And while there are no inversions, let's be honest, the only inversions that are the best on an RMC are the Death Roll, and maybe the Joker ones. No one rides an RMC for the inversions. They ride for airtime, and the airtime here is just as good as any other RMC. You get thrown in the same way, and this one has perks that some of the other RMCs don't. One thing is that it's a long ride. It definitely does not feel too short. You never feel like, dang, they could have done so much more with the area. You're going around so many different parts, there's so many great drops, so many overbank turns, but it never feels repetitive because they have it switching up at the right moments, and it all culminates in the very fun finale involving 3 tunnels. And it's one of the most memorable parts of any RMC. I think at its best, this ride does not ever lose speed. There are times when it does, but on my rides on my most recent visit, it never did. So while it may not quite stand out in a whole lot of other ways compared to things like Steel Vengeance or Iron Gwazi, it still has great moments of its own, like the tunnels, the first drop, and the drop that leads into the second half is also a super memorable moment. This ride has a slight rowdiness to it that other RMCs don't. The other RMCs are all very fast and intense, but they feel controlled. This one, being the oldest, does have a slight bit of jankiness to it, but it's never that bad. It feels glass smooth, but you can kind of feel the profiling with a bit of bumpiness as you go through the layout, and I think that adds to the experience. There's nothing painful about it, but it's just a slightly unhinged nature that other RMCs can't quite recreate and probably never will. All in all, New Texas Giants is an incredible headliner attraction for this park. And it is supported by an amazing Premier Rides launch coaster, a very underrated hypercoaster, a great B&M, one of the most underrated roller coasters period, a classic Aero Mine Train, an intense Schwarzkopf looper with shockingly great elements, a phenomenal SNS 40 free spin, and a variety of excellent supporting coasters that can be enjoyed by kids and adults alike. So all in all, I think this is a very underrated roller coaster lineup, given that many think it's not among the best even in the Six Flags chain. But for me, there are only 3 parks with better roller coasters, being Great America, Great Adventure, and Magic Mountain. So this is overall a bit overlooked, and many tend to disagree because they've been on the roller coasters, so they say, yeah, I didn't have the same experience as you did. And of course, that happens, but for those who haven't gone yet, I hope this might have given you a bit of reason to maybe give these rides a chance. They're definitely, in my opinion, worth checking out as one of the most comprehensive and overlooked roller coaster lineups in the United States. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below your ranking if you've been to the park, or any questions you have if you have not. Subscribe for more theme park content. I'll see you next time.